Chapter 5. Even if it ain't broke, fix it. When we seek opportunity, human nature compels us to follow success. Often, this means following the herd. But when you're following the herd, all we see is the rear end of the person in front of us. Don't ignore the extraordinary opportunities in India today, the ones that reward the innovators and the disruptors. Innovate. Disrupt. In today's business world, you can't open a web page or pick up a newspaper without running across those buzzwords. In my experience, though, they're more talked about than understood. Let me be clear. If you're building a business that hopes to last more than 3 years, and if innovation and disruption aren't at the heart of that business, you'll probably fail. Sure, not everyone can or even desires to build a business that will be viable 15 or 20 years down the road. Most entrepreneurs focus on the impact they can make in the present. Even so, to make the present count, you have to be highly innovative, ruthlessly disruptive, and willfully adaptive. Business changes daily. No matter how focused your goals, you're aiming at a moving target. Forget the status quo. We all know it doesn't exist anymore. Let's begin with disruption. Disruption doesn't force you to act rashly or with a false sense of urgency. You don't disrupt to disrupt. You don't smash the hornet's nest just to savor the chaos that follows. Eventually, you'll get stung. Nor do you need to pursue disruption 24/7. In fact, disruption doesn't work when all it means is change today, change tomorrow, change the day after tomorrow. No. Disruption needs to be accompanied by deep thought and a vision extending beyond the day after tomorrow. True disruption requires urgency across the long term. Also, remember, when you're driven by your peers, you're not being disruptive. That's clamor, just a lot of noise. Pay attention to your own goal. That's why I like the quote. I am too busy working on my own grass to notice if yours is greener. As for innovation, it is a highly deceptive term. A lot of growing business falls into a common trap. They assume innovation is a one-off great idea. They forget that innovation has a context and relates in some significant way to the present, failing which, it risks being misunderstood or being ahead of its times. Moreover, any innovative enterprise has to undergo a constant cycle of iteration before getting absorbed into the team's DNA. But not all financial plans seem to follow a model of innovation and disruption. Does the following scenario sound familiar? When first starting out, you think, I'll work on growing the business until my next round of funding. Your goalpost then becomes not how you're building the business, but where your investors will come from. When you focus on attracting investors through unnecessary or poorly directed innovation or disruption, your financial status becomes the goalpost. Your business, in the meantime, goes sideways. I've sat in countless meetings where otherwise smart individuals and investors ask the founder, so what are your top 3 priorities to raise the next round of funding? Don't get me wrong, funding is an integral part of a high-growth business. But how will anticipating the source of the next 3 rounds of funding help the founder and entrepreneur build a rock-solid, lasting, and scalable business? Your only goalpost is the business you build responsibly with an eye towards the future. Good capital will always follow well-articulated focus and thoroughly executed businesses on high-growth, profitable paths. In our early days in the media and entertainment business, when our focus was TV production, the show that established UTV as an innovator, a disruptor, and a creator of a new wave of Indian television was the daily soap Shanti, which had more firsts than anyone can recall now. Shanti was the first ever daily afternoon soap at a time when there was still no concept of anything being viewed 5 days a week, least of all in the afternoons, typically reserved for educational and documentary programs. Why daily? We wanted our content to be habit-forming. Each episode would have a cliffhanger, such that you had to watch it the next day to know how the story went. Why afternoon? Our focus audience was female, and in the afternoons, women were more likely to be undisturbed, free of the dual responsibilities of kids and household chores. When we dreamt up Shanti, no one had produced more than the standard 13 to 26 episodes at a time. In 1994, there were no storylines that would extend for years, yet hold attention daily. However, here we were embarking on an odyssey to create 260 episodes each year. The talent pool required to pull off such an audacious idea simply didn't exist. We needed to find, recruit, train, and build a well-oiled machine in a very short time. Looked at it in today's context, starting Shanti from scratch was as challenging as starting an entire company in the space of tech or internet or e-commerce. With no ecosystem or talent in place, we built from the ground up and created an entire back-end and logistics network to shoot and deliver at scale with precision and efficiency. Constant customer feedback to innovate, change, and adapt was at the core of our success. We grew strong on account of the loyalty of the repeat viewer, the customer who came back every single day to watch the groundbreaking content. In true UTV style, we broke down the issues one by one and came up with a schedule that allowed us to shoot an episode a day. An episode a day, unheard of at that time. As preparation for this massive undertaking, the team and I watched countless telenovelas from South America, the champs of daily soaps, and realized that even they weren't cracking out content at the rate we planned to, even though theirs was an established industry with a wealth of trained talent. For us, the pressure was on. But our crack team was up to the task. Since television at that time wasn't a mature medium for directors and writers, the show's director, Adi Pocha, came from an advertising background. We rented a warehouse the size of an aircraft hangar and air-conditioned it from the ground up, building a permanent set, or more accurately, 17 different sets in one studio, with permanent lighting to suit the various locations we needed to start filming those first episodes. With the logistics locked down, we sought actors who could understand and appreciate the rigors of reporting to set at 7 a.m., 6 days a week, and working through until at least 7 p.m., before heading home through Mumbai's rush hour traffic. When they'd get home, they'd read the next day's script, learn their lines, and return the following morning bright and early for the day's shoot. Lather, rinse, repeat. Each of the actors were told upfront that the rigorous schedule would be a marathon, not a sprint. We decided Shanti would not have breaks or seasons. Instead, it was to be a true daily soap, as long as the creative team and the story hooks kept the audience riveted. We were embarking on a year-round experiment in innovation in Indian television, one that would set a trend that carries on till date. We found a host of up-and-comers to take on the minor parts. The most difficult role to cast was that of the female lead, Shanti. 2 months and dozens of candidates into our search for a fresh-faced actress who could meet the demands of a daily soap, we finally set our sights on Mandira Bedi. Mandira clearly had what it took to be successful. Still, a bit stiff and self-conscious, she wasn't seasoned enough at that point in her career to hold an audience's attention day after day. 3 weeks from the first day of shooting, we had our leading lady, but there was still a lot of work in front of us. The director had a brilliant idea. Over the next 4 days, he took Mandira and a small camera team into the streets of Mumbai and just let our lead actor loose at traffic signals, stores — there were no malls at that time in India — colleges and bus stops. Any place where she would be forced to interact with people in the most uninhibited manner. To get her to shake off her inhibitions and act naturally, the camera team shot from a distance. After every such interaction, the team would huddle in the minivan to watch the footage. Mandira would study it and reflect over how she could change her next interaction to make it more authentic. And in those few days of pounding the pavements, a star was born. Even so, Shanti struggled for the first 6 months. Audiences didn't take to it easily. They had never seen anything quite like it before. We knew we needed to focus on the strength of the storyline, so we tripled the size of our writing and creative teams. Not an easy task when writers for that kind of content, especially on such a rigorous schedule, were few and far between. We brought in people from advertising and films and even some book writers. The mix didn't work, at least at the outset. The logistics of shooting an episode a day and without breaks took its toll on talent. As team members fell sick, we had to write them out of the day's episode, a difficult task, and one that only slowed production and threatened to knock us off our schedule. Our learning for a task so large was that we should have budgeted for 60 days of trial runs, fine-tuning, and details in anticipating the unexpected consequences of production at such a scale and pace. In a way, this was different from today, when many companies plan a big bang launch, believing that savvy marketing and a product on the shelf will do the trick. Mostly, this does not work. The smarter companies do test launches and phase releases, which decades of studies have shown are more effective ways of taking a product to market. After 6 months, with all of us struggling, we had our ducks in a row and an audience that had warmed up to this new concept and habit. From there, Shanti ran for 3 years with close to 800 episodes. In that time, we trained more people for careers in the television industry than any other show. Many of the initial team's members went on to form their own successful companies or remain professionals and continue to do well. That's been my greatest source of pride from the show, creating, working with, and empowering teams and colleagues and watching them grow, move on, and become leaders, entrepreneurs, and creative geniuses. The show's eventual success allowed us to explore the possibility of building a syndication model for Indian content, another first in the Indian media landscape. No one till then had looked at the market outside India for TV content to be syndicated globally. We realized that Shanti could be popular with South Asians as a whole, so we sold the rights to the show in more than 40 countries. I wasn't aware of how disruptive the show was in the television industry until we went on a promotional tour to Sri Lanka to support Shanti's introduction there. After landing in Colombo and ambling out of the airport, expecting to quietly get into our cars and head to the hotel, we were deluged by a sea of humanity. Fans of the show lined the streets to wave at the cast, as if the Prime Minister or the President had just arrived back in the country. We all sat in the convertible and smiled at each other, not believing our eyes, but pleased that our instincts and hard work had paid off. Shanti was a lesson in innovation and disruption early in my UTV days. It was also a prime example of my obsession for scale when it came to starting and growing businesses. You have your team in place, everyone's psyched to be at the cutting edge of a nascent market, and you're ready to hit the ground running. On your way out the door today, carry this thought with you. Today's entrepreneur winners will be among those who deeply study and understand the Indian demographics for their company or their new idea. I break these demographics down into 3 broad segments. The urban, the top 200 million. Rural India, the 625 million who form the bottom of the pyramid. And the middle 400 million, the emerging markets. I want to focus on the last, to understand and analyze this wide open and untapped market. Barring a few FMCGs and MNCs, how many of us talk about the fact that to date, 80% of our market comes only from the top 10 to 15 cities in India? Talk about a cup far more than half empty. The questions we need to ask to define the target demographic and give shape to untapped markets are: who are my target consumers? Age, gender, socioeconomic status, education. Are they going to be spenders or savers? What and how are they going to consume over the next 5 years and more? How do they move, communicate, stay in touch with the world? How, and how well, are they going to keep up with technology and social and media spaces? What will their daily lives look like? And most importantly, what impact and role do I want to play in all this? Understand your markets inside out, and you will understand innovation and disruption in its purest form. In many ways, launching Hungama, our kids' TV channel, was one of our most disruptive endeavors. It all came about when Zarina walked into the room with a remarkable idea for a local children's channel during one of our brainstorming sessions. India already had 6 kids' channels, experienced global players who did exactly this sort of thing very well in 160 countries around the world. So our obvious first question was, is there space for one more kids' channel? Then we wondered if we were ready to take on the giants who had over 5,000 hours of free programming in their libraries. Nearly all the people we spoke to in the advertising world, where our revenues would come from, told us the market had no gap. Worse still, all our research suggested that kids adored Cartoon Network and many of its leading shows. Fortunately, our gut told us there was a huge gap for a local channel and that a truly Indian brand could succeed. For us, that's where the challenge and the fun lay. Fresh from our learnings from 2 shows we had done for other channels, Shakalaka Boom Boom and Shararat, we knew that if we provided the right content for the core group of kids age 4 to 14, they would tune out of their daily soaps and horror shows they had become accustomed to watching. We saw the global majors with their paint-by-the-numbers approach and their vast content libraries as opportunities, not threats, as their approach gave us total flexibility to innovate, disrupt, and think outside the box. And disrupt we did, with trailblazing content from Japan, including Doraemon and Shin-Chan. 8 years later, they are still the top-running kids' shows on Indian television. We also launched locally produced live-action shows, the differentiator our audiences were looking for. The channel's launch was an uphill battle. We got, and still get, our fair share of negative feedback from mothers for Shin-Chan. The first 6 months were nail-biting. As with Shanti, nothing worked instantly. The skeptics sharpened their verbal knives and were quick with their obligatory, "I told you so." But after 8 months, we stabilized and turned the tide. I guess the kids finally prevailed over their moms. Whatever the reason, our positioning started to work. 18 months forward, we were the #1 channel in the sector. One of our global competitors bought the channel from us, thus starting a productive and long-standing partnership with the Walt Disney Company that culminated many years later in their taking over UTV. In the business of films, one of our proudest and most disruptive acts was when we greenlit the movie No One Killed Jessica. Jessica Lal was a celebrity bartender at a Delhi bar when she was shot dead for refusing a drink to the accused Manu Sharma after hours. While there were close to 100 witnesses to Jessica's killing in cold blood, very few testified on her behalf, intimidated by the accused and his politically connected family. The ensuing trial shredded Jessica's character and exonerated Sharma. Importantly, Sharma's trial had a connection to our film Rang De Basanti, which was released on 26 January 2006. One of the central events in the film is the death of Ajay Singh Rathod, a pilot in the Indian Air Force who flew one of the many Russian MiG aircrafts that crashed ever so often due to mechanical failures. In the film, the blame for the death rests squarely with corrupt politicians, and the revelation sparks off a candlelight march by the youth of India, a first in Indian cinema, as such shows of solidarity were not common then, to India Gate and the tomb of the unknown soldier in Delhi. Not quite a month later, on 21st February 2006, Sharma was acquitted, a grievous miscarriage of justice. The next morning, the headline in the leading newspaper, The Times of India, said it all. No one killed Jessica Lal. The nation's spirit was ignited. What played out over the next few days in real life was the candlelight march from Rang De Basanti, not just at India Gate, but in the streets of cities and villages across India. For almost a week, media attention remained focused on the nation and its youth, millions repulsed by and angry at the verdict. The pressure on the government to bring Jessica's killer to justice was immense. When the case was reopened, witness after witness, reluctant to speak on Jessica's behalf during the first trial, now came forward to testify to the truth. Manu Sharma was convicted to life imprisonment. From the outset, I knew this was a movie we had to make. No One Killed Jessica etched itself into the consciousness of the country's youth, and it also opened our eyes to the generation's value and tolerance in a world where these attributes aren't always present or passed on. It's not often in your career you get to make an impact similar to that of Rang De Basanti and then watch the film unfold in real life a month later with a nation in rage. To have the opportunity to document Jessica's story on film was a rare honor, intensely emotional and deeply satisfying. Despite pressure, legal and otherwise, to mothball the film, we remained undaunted. When you're being disruptive, there are no half measures. You go all the way or you drop out. After selling Hungama to Disney, we went back to brainstorming new plans for broadcasting. Zarina walked in again like clockwork with a one-slide presentation telling us that we needed to focus on the 16 to 24 demographic, which was then being ignored by every channel in India. Only trendy music channels like MTV and Channel V catered to that core audience, but they were exclusively for music. We recognized a clear opportunity in this space, and Zarina's proposed youth channel would be at the foundation of our differentiated bouquet of channels. Her one-pager was spot on, and the 10 people gathered in the room got it immediately. The best way to pitch a product, service, or idea is to start at its positioning and what it stands for. Zarina's aim was to test a core local Indian channel, Desi Cool on the left, that the youth would be proud of and identify with. The one-slide pitch was, let's test this. Desi Cool versus Chic Cool. Humorous, mad crazy, outrageous versus sexy and slick. Aamir Khan in Rang De Basanti versus Aamir Khan in Dil Chahta Hai. Believe it's cool to speak Hindi, reverse snobbery, versus believe it's cool to speak English. What followed was 60 days of nationwide focus groups while a core creative and marketing team in our office defined the channel's positioning. From that idea was born Bindaas, the first youth channel in the Indian television landscape. After our appearance, most of our competitors moved to that positioning out of necessity, since we had created the space, a core viewing audience. It's funny how a name can define a brand and its consumer following over time. What would Twitter be if it had been called Jitter, a name under serious consideration at that point before cooler heads prevailed? What would Facebook be if its purpose and target audience weren't so clearly defined? So too for both Hungama and Bindaas. When we researched a name for our kids' channel, Hungama wasn't even in the top 10 of our first list. But our audience picked it as the obvious leader, and the name came to define the brand and what it stood for: mischievous, curious, high-spirited fun. Naturally, our content took the same shape and form. Similarly, Bindaas was chosen by our core audience during research. The name said it all, and steered what was to be one of the most disruptive and controversial, at least in the beginning, programming formats on Indian television. An early show on Bindaas, Emotional Atyachar, EA, inspired by the wacky, edgy theme song of our movie Devdi, followed a format that has broken barriers. Here is a reality show where an unmarried girl or boy who feels their boyfriend-girlfriend is cheating on them calls EA. Over a 5-day sustained period, we, undercover, follow the straying partner. Sometimes tempt him or her as a test. Each episode ends with the suspicious partner being shown the 5 days of coverage, culminating in a showdown with the significant other. Millions of viewers took to EA due to its boldness and still love it, and many others loved to hate it. Indeed, at the outset, we received a lot of negative media, but within a year, even families and parents started getting involved. They realized that it was better for their kids to learn the truth when they were in fledgling relationships than to discover startling facts after they tied the knot. EA triggered an avalanche of emotions, discussion, and attention, and launched the youth genre of programming in India, and with it, Bindaas. While EA may not have the mass impact of some shows, it is now one of the longest-running weekly shows on Indian television, with a strong team innovating every season. India today has so many sectors on the rise that opportunities for entrepreneurs to innovate and disrupt are far greater than those in more advanced countries. Even if you come to the game late in India, you can line up close to the start. For instance, today, in everything to do with technology, India is still at day one. Health and education, day one. The internet, maybe day two. Brand awareness, all aspects of branding, day two. Tourism, leisure and entertainment, day one. Even though India's strength is its service economy, we're nascent in most other sectors. Opportunities for disruptive and innovative thinkers are unprecedented. So what's the bad news? You need to look inward for an answer to that question. When people seek opportunity, they tend to focus on one sector. It's human nature to follow success. Often, there's money to be made by following the herd. At least that's the conventional wisdom. But when you're part of the herd, all you see is the rear end of the person in front of you. Don't ignore the extraordinary opportunities in India today for first-generation entrepreneurs entering untapped markets. Anyone thinking he'll be late to the altar of emerging markets isn't just wrong, but also susceptible to seeking quick fixes on entering the game. Quick fixes never lead to longevity. The lack of a longevity plan never leads to success. In each of our endeavors, we kept our edge sharp by remaining clued into the market needs and making long-term thinking a habit. Ideas and business, like people, need to breathe and mature. And an understanding of when and how to innovate and disrupt is a crucial aspect of the growth process. Chapter summary. I'm skeptical about the age-old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Whoever said it didn't understand the pleasure that comes from growing a business, pushing boundaries, and crashing conventions along the way. Innovation and disruption doesn't amount to acting rashly with a false sense of urgency. Nor do they signify change for the sake of change, today, tomorrow, and every day. Your goal is to build a rock-solid business for the long term. Capital, talent, and customers will always follow if you are on that path. Remember, it's not easy when you are not on a trodden path. You need patience and perseverance. You need to be ready to struggle for weeks, months, maybe years, because you believe in what you are doing. A colleague, a part of my core team, sent me an email that I think highlights some of the traits I look for in entrepreneurs or leaders as I go forward. After 4 years, as I move on to take this leadership post in a new company, the lessons I take with me, having worked closely with you and observed you, are firstly, your guts and balls to take bold calls. I have not seen this in many leaders. The fact that not all of them worked out for you, but that never deterred you. Your ability to grasp a new idea, problem, proposal, or opportunity and ask those incisive questions. Your speed and clarity of decision-making. And lastly, your painstaking effort and your patience for taking the team along in the decision-making and execution process and allowing each member the chance to own it. I don't think you had all this so clear when you started your journey, but I believed you focused on these points and built on them, made them your pillars of strength as an entrepreneur and a leader. For you, every day is a new day to look at things afresh and question the constant.